Oxford University's 800-year history had never witnessed such profound silence. Professor Harrington had just declared, "Africa has contributed nothing to human civilization." Ibrahim Traore rose from his seat as 500 academics held their breath. But no one could have predicted that his words over the next 10 minutes would go viral and end the professor's career. The Sheldonian Theatre at Oxford was packed that March afternoon. It was meant to be a routine lecture on global leadership in the 21st century, featuring various world leaders and academics. Ibrahim Traore, president of Burkina Faso, had been invited as part of the university's African Leadership Series. He sat quietly in the front row, dressed in a simple dark suit, taking notes as various speakers presented their views on development, democracy, and international cooperation. Professor Edmund Harrington took the stage at 3:30 p.m. A man in his late 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he commanded respect through decades of published work on European history and civilization. His introduction was glowing. Rhodes Scholar, author of 12 books, holder of 3 honorary doctorates. As he began his lecture on the foundations of modern civilization, his tone was confident, almost dismissive, as if the conclusions he was about to present were beyond dispute. "When we examine the pillars of human advancement," Harrington began, his voice echoing through the historic venue, "we see a clear pattern. Mathematics from Greece, law from Rome, philosophy from Germany, industrial innovation from Britain." He paused, surveying the audience over his glasses. "The foundations of what we call civilization have decidedly Western origins." Several audience members shifted uncomfortably, but Harrington continued, emboldened by the academic setting that had long protected such views. 20 minutes into his lecture, Harrington made the statement that would define the rest of his life. Now, some might ask about other continents' contributions. Asia gave us gunpowder and paper, certainly. The Americas had sophisticated calendars. But Africa? He paused dramatically, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "I challenge anyone in this room to name a single significant contribution to human civilization from sub-Saharan Africa. The continent has been a recipient of civilization, not a contributor to it." The silence that followed was deafening. In the front row, Ibrahim Traore slowly closed his notebook. He placed his pen carefully on the desk beside it. Around him, several African students and academics sat frozen, caught between outrage and the intimidating atmosphere of challenging such a senior professor in Oxford's most prestigious venue. The moment stretched on, heavy with unspoken tension, until Traore raised his hand. "Yes?" Harrington acknowledged him with barely concealed irritation, clearly not expecting to be challenged. Traore stood, his movement deliberate and calm. "Professor Harrington," he began, his voice carrying despite not using the microphone, "I would like to respond to your assertion, if I may." Harrington's smirk widened. "By all means, Mr." He pretended not to know who Traore was, though the president had been introduced at the beginning of the event. "Traore, Ibrahim Traore," he replied simply, not mentioning his title. "And I accept your challenge." A ripple of anticipation ran through the audience. Several people began discreetly recording on their phones, sensing something significant was about to unfold. Harrington gestured dismissively toward the stage. "Please, enlighten us. But do try to stick to historical facts rather than romantic nationalism." The condescension in his voice was palpable. Traore walked to the podium with measured steps. He carried with him a simple leather folder that he placed carefully on the lectern. For a moment he stood silently, looking out at the audience, then directly at Harrington. "Professor," he began, "before I address your challenge, may I ask you a question? In your extensive research, have you ever visited the manuscript collections in Timbuktu? Have you studied the mathematical treatises of the Dogon people? Have you examined the metallurgical techniques of the Haya people of Tanzania?" Harrington waved his hand dismissively. "Ancient mud buildings and primitive folklore hardly constitute civilization, Mr. Traore. We're talking about contributions to human advancement, not anthropological curiosities." Several gasps could be heard from the audience at the blatant disrespect. But Traore remained calm, opening his folder and pulling out a single document. "Then let us begin with something you might recognize," he said, holding up a photocopy of an ancient text. "This is a page from the Labombo bone discovered in Swaziland. It's 44,000 years old, Professor. It contains the earliest known mathematical calculations in human history. 29 distinct notches, marking lunar cycles. Mathematics didn't begin in Greece, Professor. It began in Africa. The smirk began to fade from Harrington's face, but he quickly recovered. Counting notches is hardly Pythagoras, he scoffed. Traore pulled out another document. Then perhaps we should discuss the Ishango bone from the Democratic Republic of Congo, 20,000 years old, containing evidence of prime numbers, multiplication, and division. This predates Greek mathematics by nearly 19,000 years. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. But you want more recent examples? Very well. Let's discuss the University of Sankore in Timbuktu, which housed 700,000 manuscripts and educated 25,000 students in the 12th century, when Oxford was still a collection of drinking halls. The audience was now completely silent, hanging on every word. Traore continued, his voice gaining strength but never losing its calm dignity. You mentioned law coming from Rome. Shall we discuss the constitution of the Ashanti Confederacy, which included checks and balances 3 centuries before the American Constitution? Or the Buganda Parliament, which had a complex system of democratic governance while Europe was still ruled by absolute monarchs? You speak of philosophy from Germany, Traore continued, now fully in his element. Have you read the philosophical texts of Zara Jacob, the 17th century Ethiopian philosopher who developed ideas about rational inquiry and human rights